Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, online and here present physically. I take this opportunity to welcome you to this PhD defense of Dr. Rhona Mijumbi Deve, I don't know how to pronounce that other name, who is the bride of the day, well, an academic bride. So her topic is rapid response mechanisms to support policy making in Uganda. And we have with us the panel of examiners. I'll start by introducing the opponent. Professor Young online, can you hear us?
Thanks, yes, good morning, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. We would like to welcome you to this PhD defense. Your the opponent, as you're aware, and also had been the external examiner. Professor Taryn Young is from Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and actually she's relaying from there. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Our other panelist is Professor Fred Ssengooba from Makerere University, College of Health Sciences, School of Public Health. You're welcome, Professor Ssengooba. The third panelist is Associate Professor David Mafigiri, Department of Social Work and Social Administration, Makerere University, and is here present. You're welcome. Thank you. We also have supervisors, Professor Nelson Sewankambo, who is here with us. You're welcome, Professor. Professor Andrew Oxman, who is online. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And Professor John Lavis, I'm not sure if he's there, but he may be online. Professor, if you're there, you're welcome. And I think really we know we are a bit behind time. We apologize for that, but don't worry, we shall be able to recover that lost time. I would just right away like to invite Dr. Rhona Mijumbi to make her presentation. You have 30 to 40 minutes to do that. And thereafter, we shall tell you what will follow. You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone who's made it this morning. I would like to share with you my work that I've been doing over the last few years on rapid response services to support policymaking in Uganda. I would like to, first of all, acknowledge my supervisors, Professor Sewankambo, Professor Lavis, and Dr. Andy Oxman, who've been a part of this work all the way. I'll start off with a quote that will really underpin the work that I'm presenting today. This is a quote from Elizabeth Kenny, who was an Australian bush nurse who discovered one of the ways to take care of polio. At the time, it was a controversial one, but when it began to get accepted, she said, I do not want medical men to discuss whether or not my work is valuable, because I know what it will do. I want them to tell me how best this new knowledge can be applied where it is needed. This really underpins the work that I have been doing. What I'll share with you today is really the background to what we did. I'll share with you the objectives that we had at the time and how we conceptualized it, the work we did in 4 studies, what it implies for policy and ongoing research, where we think our work was strong and how it might have been limited. But first, let's get a few definitions out of the way so that when I use these words repeatedly, we will be on the same page. So when I say rapid response services, I'm really talking about services that support policymakers and health managers with timely evidence when they are making decisions and policy. So they basically provide a summary of available evidence at the time. It's already synthesized, contextualized, and packaged in a way that is accessible to any policymaker. Knowledge translation has been defined by the World Health Organization as the synthesis, exchange, and ethical application of knowledge by relevant stakeholders to accelerate the benefits of global and local innovation in strengthening health systems, but also improving beneficiaries' health. And when I talk about evidence, we won't be in court. I'll be talking about facts, whether these are actual or asserted, that are intended for use in supporting a conclusion. They themselves are not the conclusion, they support the conclusion. And there are all kinds of facts which people might know from experience or observation, but in this particular study, focuses on peer-reviewed research. Now, the rapid response service that we'll be talking about today, this is the model, this is what it looks like. So it basically starts off with a policymaker who's trying to make decisions, trying to make choices between, several of these. And he thinks he needs evidence to support this. So what he'll do, he'll get in touch with this service, which is coordinated by hired staff who are mostly researchers or knowledge brokers. They'll have a back and forth, conversation until these people actually understand what it is that he's looking for, the context, and they can answer his question. They'll then go through an academic process, where they search for the best available evidence, they appraise it, they contextualize it and summarize it and take it through a content reviewer. These people here, the service, they're mostly process experts. So they'll be able to find the evidence wherever it is, but they will not be experts at all the topical content that will come to them. So that's why they need a content reviewer to look at this work, who will give them some feedback. They'll summarize this evidence, come up with a brief and return it to the policymaker in the agreed time. Now, usually they'll have a scope. So what you see over here is the scope that this service was working with. So it was answering health systems queries within those pillars, but also questions that need addressing within 28 days to be able to make the decision. So generally, when we started this work, there had been, and there still are, there had been repeated calls for policymakers to use evidence as they make decisions, as they make policies. And this evidence could be used, for them to clarify these problems that they're talking about, for them to look at options that policy options or solutions that could be used for the problems, but also to consider what factors are important for implementing and evaluating this. However, when they're trying to do this, they're still meeting lots and lots of hurdles. And you'll find many of them in the literature, but very commonly cited is the lack of timely information or evidence, it not being relevant at the time they need it, and also the quality being questionable. But there's also a lot of poor interaction between the users of this evidence and those who produce it, and therefore missed opportunities to input in each other's processes. And of course, there's a lot of summaries, but they lack clear, actionable messages for the policymakers to make use of them. So rapid response mechanisms or services are a promising strategy to try and deal with some of these barriers. Now, at the time we started this work, we actually knew nothing about rapid response services in low and middle income countries. What we knew was information coming from two major studies. So in 2006, John Lavis and others had come up with this framework where they were trying to look at, efforts or assessing, country level efforts of trying to link, evidence with policy making or with practice. And they had cited rapid response services as one strategy you can use for facilitating user pool. So user pool is when the policymakers do feel the need for the evidence and they step out to get it, find a few hurdles, and rapid response services could come in and facilitate that user pool. But a year later, a study by Judith Healy and others who were going out to find the interest in a rapid response service, went to about 7 Asian countries. And their conclusion was that rapid response services in low and middle income countries might not be feasible. They gave a number of reasons, many of which I will share later, but they concluded that this might not be necessary, leave alone feasible, but not necessary for health systems work. It might be maybe for disasters and infectious diseases and things like that. So our aim was to now evaluate a rapid response service, and we piloted this in Uganda as part of a collaborative project at the time, the EU-funded SURE project. And the specific objectives we went out with, we wanted to describe and analyze the establishment of such a service, but also to determine what factors affect utilization. The second objective is very important because if you remember in the model, this model starts with the policymaker. So it's very, very important to understand what it is that would affect it being utilized. So to describe and analyze the establishment, we said, let's first establish the feasibility. Can this thing actually work? And when we have done so, let's describe and analyze the establishment of this service if it actually can exist. And to determine what affects utilization, let's determine what contextual factors actually affect uptake. And let's also look at some of the product factors. So exploring policymakers' experiences with these briefs that come of such a service. And this is how we conceptualized our work at the time. So we said, all right, we want to, in our first objective, to establish the feasibility of this service. And once we think it actually can be feasible, we want to also establish in objective 2 what the establishment variables are. And we are cognizant of these factors up here, the constraining factors that actually lead you to begin to think about this process of establishment. We are also cognizant of these ones here, the unintended consequences. You might start off wanting to do something, but there are consequences that might come off this establishment process. Now, in case we have actually established it, and we have this service that provides users with timely and relevant high quality evidence, what are these factors here that would prevent people coming back to it? So in our objective 3, we have the contextual factors. Objective 4, we have the product related factors. But we are also cognizant of these latent consequences. And I would like you to keep that at the back of your mind, because there's something I'll share at the end of this. What are the latent consequences that can come off this service, much as you were planning for something else? But we are not blind to these alternative variables up here, that because of these constraining factors, not everybody is using rapid response services. There are other alternative mechanisms that people are actually using to try to get to the same endpoint. So in our first study, we said, well, let's establish the feasibility of a rapid response service to meet policymakers' urgent needs for research evidence about health systems in Uganda. So we used a case study just under 2 years, and we placed this in the health sector. And our objective in this was to identify challenges to implementation. So we collected our data using questionnaires, key informant interviews, and we summarized our information using frequencies and proportions where it was quantitative, and where we had semi-structured questionnaires, we coded these and came up with some themes. This is what we found. We basically spoke to mostly people affiliated with the Ministry of Health, and they identified themselves as senior policymakers or mid-level policymakers. And the topics or areas that they mostly posed to the rapid response services, rapid response service, were about governance and organization arrangements. And after we'd done this work for that period of time, about 2 years, this is what we found. That a number of times there was a change in what these people felt were the answers to the questions. So when they used to pose these questions, we would ask them, okay, before we do this work, what do you think the answer to your question is? And none of them came blank, like I really don't know, So these people do know something. It might be they're not confident about it, or they don't know everything about it. But after we had provided the rapid response brief, 43 out of 65 times, they changed their mind about the answer that they thought was more appropriate. In terms of the course of action, so they might know the answer, but what the course of action would be, what the policy action would be, about half the time, 46% of the time, they did change their courses of action as well. And the confidence in their own answers. So, they come with these answers and you're asking them, how confident are you about it? Most of them were neither confident or unconfident. Others were like totally unconfident. So the majority were in there, as you will see. But after receiving help from the rapid response service, majority of them moved to the very confident or confident sections. Same to the course of action. Again, you see about 67% were neither confident nor unconfident, or they were unconfident. But after receiving help from the rapid response service, this moved to very confident or confident sections. In terms of satisfaction, all of them were either satisfied or very satisfied, with the answers they got. But there were a few who were not satisfied with the service. And this entirely came from them receiving their answers beyond the time that they had actually expected them. We had a few who we lost to follow up, and this was because either they moved their post or they were not available to continue the process, because this is a process that goes back and forth with the policymaker. So we do receive their question, we begin the process, but in some way they're unable to continue with us. And generally, all of them agreed that research evidence was important for policymaking. Their concern was about it being twisted to suit one's needs. And yes, this sounds really nice and feasible, but it's not without challenges. So we did meet a few challenges in terms of acceptance. People did not have experience with such a service, and so they were a little skeptical, or they just lacked interest. And also they were worried that this is run by researchers. What do they know about policy making? And then finding personnel with the right mix, to work on such a service was not easy, but also the resources in a low-income country like ours, internet connectivity and access to full text reports was trouble. So we did find that these services are feasible, but they were not common in low and middle income countries. At the time, we didn't know any other aside from ourselves. What we commonly found were, hastily convened task forces or advisory bodies, which act in a reactive manner and do not take advantage of the proactivity that such a service would bring. And what we found in terms of, the increasing confidence in the policymaking process, or more options, that policymakers could choose from, was also documented at the time. Stridom was doing work at around the time we were also doing. And his comment was that scientific evidence actually exposes policymaking to a wider range of validated concepts and experiences. And what we found in terms of this being mostly used centrally and hardly at the districts was not strange. Nick Black, about a decade before, had noted that research evidence might actually be more influential in policymaking at the central level than at the local level, because the center, is characterized a lot with a lot of uncertainty and negotiation than the local level, and it might be able to benefit from this. So in our second study, we said, okay, this is feasible, but how do you actually establish it? Okay. So within this case study, we employed a grounded theory. We used qualitative research methods, employing grounded theory approach, and we used the life cycle theory as a sensitizing concept. So we had in-depth interviews with key informants who were intimately involved in the establishment process. And to this, we also added document reviews of important documents to this process. And, we analyzed the preceding efforts, the setting up, the resulting events, and came up with a theme eventually, which we will present as a thematic framework. What we found is that developing the rapid response service actually took about 2 decades, and within this, we could map out, on the life cycle stage, life cycle theory, we could see the stages of where you could say, this was pre-gestation, this was gestation, or this was birthing. Here we think we are headed towards maturity. But what we also saw was that the efforts were kind of focusing from the global level towards the local level as you began to get the service in place. We also noted that as the rapid response service, went through evolution, there was a lot of reinvention and adaptation that had to happen for it to survive. And this, was on the design features. So for example, we went out thinking that in terms of personnel, remember this was part of a wider, SURE project. There was a lot of other work happening. So we thought, well, the coordinator and research scientists on the project can give just a little bit of their time, to work on the rapid response service. We did not think that there was high demand. And then when we went out, we learned that, first of all, a rapid response service is human resource intensive. And the demand we also found was really overwhelming. So we had to adjust and get a staff who was working 100% on the service. And later, we actually had to hire more staff really working 100% of their time. In terms of qualifications and skills, we thought, well, this is about what? Evidence, research evidence, explain it to somebody, they use it. So let's get somebody who can read research and can explain what this is about. Clinical epidemiologists, research scientists should do good. When we went out, we found, yeah, these are basic skills, okay? They're necessary. But these would only be useful if they're combined with good communication skills, good writing skills. Anybody who's been doing writing, you will know that this is not easy. And also health policy analysis skills. You cannot be advising on something you actually do not understand. So we found that some people had to be trained on the job to be able to get that basic set of skills. So many things change, operations, products, and I'll tell you more about that. But in terms of the theory of establishing this thing, we found that there's a structural component to it. There's also a temporal component to it. So in terms of a structure, we found that this rapid response service is not something that just happens, once and that's it, you have a service. It's actually an ecosystem that is continuously growing. And the ecosystem, its structure is actually incremental. So you actually start off with a subject. Within this subject, you have a problem and you have its solution. So we look at this together because they give each other context. If I say solution, I mean solution to what? I said this is a solution to what? So I discuss it together with the problem, which makes this the subject then. Now, once you have your subject clear, then you begin to look for resources to actually make your solution activated, okay? So these resources might be time, they might be people, they might be places, equipment, all kinds of things that you would need. Now, once you start getting those things in place, you now need to govern them. You need some sort of administration, leadership, for these human resource people you have. So you will have the governance now grow over these. Now, this can actually survive on its own. But to be able to be more effective and more efficient, there are things you will need in terms of support. So this is where you will have your funders come in, you have networks and partnerships coming in to formulate the support of this. And of course, this does not work in a vacuum. It's actually sitting in an environment, which environment is an ecosystem of its own. It's continuously changing. And although I present these as distinct layers, the subjects, the resources, the layers actually interact very, very widely. And this ecosystem is formed over a protracted period of time. As I showed you earlier, this particular service took about 2 decades. And you can trace it over the different stages, pre-gestation to maturity. But the more layers you form, the more apparent and important they become. So when you start to formulate your subject, there might just be 2 people, 3 people, a small group talking about it. But when you begin to talk about resources, now the subject grows, okay? You're bringing in more people, when you talk about support, you're now talking funders, this thing begins to expand. So the more each layer becomes more and more apparent, and each of these layers has to actually, as it happens, it's also mobilizing for the next layer, okay? It's mobilizing for the next stage. So once we are at the subject, we are mobilizing for the next layer. And they also have to overcome certain challenges to be able to get to the next stage. Now, the environmental ecosystem also grows wider as the service grows. I think I've mentioned that. And there is reinvention that is required to make sure this thing survives its environment. So what we have at the end of the day is a theoretical framework. I apologize for the middle section, but I'm going to show you something that will make it clearer. So what we have here, when you see these lines aligning between the inner circle and the outer one, it's not by coincidence. In the pre-gestation period, you're actually talking about the subject. You're really trying to clarify your problem. You're trying to get stakeholders together to talk about it. When you go into the gestation period, you're trying to mobilize resources that will probably be very important for your birthing period. So all of those kind of align with where they should be. So basically, what you see in the middle area are the factors that are important for those two to happen. So for instance, pre-gestation and the subject to grow. At that time, you're clarifying your problem, you're trying to get vision convergence. Different people are talking about the same thing, but they might have different mandates, but you're trying to mobilize these people to get their vision together. You're mobilizing resources, you're sharing information. At this point also, you're really depending on positive attitude. There are many people who are putting in and not able to get out. You know, their efforts are not paid for, but this is what happens at the beginning of an idea. Then you move on to, you know, trying to get from gestation to birthing. You're now getting your resources to get executed. You're beginning to talk about your demand side human resource. You're talking about champions, sensitizing people about what it is you're talking about. Your technical leadership is also taking shape. And so happens for the others as well. For instance, when you come to the growth area, now things are beginning to get routinized. You know, you're getting routinization, you can predict what is going on. You have learned a few things, you're beginning to guide other people as well. You're taking stock because soon you will be at your maturity level and you need to rebirth, or you head straight for your demise. What we have introduced to this framework, which wasn't there before, is the replication stage. So when this service gets to around, you know, after it has birthed, it's very, very important that it begins to replicate itself or to support other services to be formulated. When it doesn't do this, there's something that's not happening. And it's akin to the formulation of a clan. If one person starts their family or one person is born and they're unable to replicate themselves, at their demise, that's the end of it. You know, we'll never know what they were about, you know, 20 years later. So this is akin to growing a science, to growing a field, to growing a clan. And it's very important for this to happen, actually important also for the survival of the legacy of the service. So we learned that rapid response services farm progress over time. And what we learned was not unique to us. Larry Grainer, who was doing work within the business community at that time, talked about organizations having to go through growth, not only in size, which we call structure, but also in age, which is the temporal bit. He also talked about, you know, these services, these organizations going through evolutionary and revolutionary periods. So the evolution are those small adaptations that I talked about, where we had to make small changes for survival. But revolutionary is that rebirthing at the end of your maturity to ensure that you do not die a natural death. And in models that are based on cumulative stages, like the one I have presented, the entity has to keep overcoming successive challenges. Within each stage, there is a challenge that it has to overcome to be able to get to the next stage, and in order for growth to be possible and continuous. So we said, okay, so now we know these things work. We know how to make them, you know, to sort of establish them. But what are the contextual factors that can affect actually utilization? Because this is very, very important for their design and their working. So within the case study, we employed process evaluation methods. We talked to people who had used the service, but also those who were conversant with the operations of such a service. For instance, health systems researchers who would have an idea about how this actually works. And we got this, like you would do in a process evaluation. We got the organization, pulled it apart. We said, these are the structures. These are the activities that happen on such an organization. And then we say, this is the optimal, you know, from literature, from speaking to people, this is what the optimal would be. But what is our reality and what's the effect of that? We used in-depth interviews to collect this data, and we went through a thematic analysis. We spoke to an equal number of health systems and health systems researchers and policymakers, and most of them were affiliated with a university or with the Ministry of Health. And many of them had been in their positions for more than 10 years, and we were comfortable that we're speaking to people who knew what they were talking about. So we came up with some descriptive categories, thematic and descriptive categories from what they explained to us as issues that would affect uptake. So we divided these into three. There were the internal factors, and internal factors in this case, we're talking about factors where the rapid response service has full control of these factors. So it can decide what the design is like, It can decide what resources it has and how to mobilize these. Then we have the external factors where the service is only in partial control of these factors. So for instance, relationships or integrity or visibility. The service is only in partial control. No matter how I come out and say, I have integrity, the power to actually say I have integrity sits with somebody else. Their perception of my integrity is important as well. In terms of visibility, I might do all the work there is in the world, but how I am picked up on the other side. So part of the power is sitting with the second or third party. And then the environmental factors in this case are factors where the service has no control, or if it does, it's really remote control. So we are talking about the policy and decision-making infrastructure in the country. We're talking things like political will, over which the service doesn't really have control. And within this, we have the smaller categorical factors. So for instance, when you talk about design, what is design? In this case, we are talking about the goals and objectives, of the service. When it comes out and says, these are the objectives, this is what we are out to do, how does this align with the user's needs? Do they feel the need for this? Are you filling a gap somewhere? The consultation mechanisms to be able to come up with the design. How do these incorporate policymakers as well? How about how it aligns with the norms and behaviors of users? Or is it coming with this huge cultural shock? So many things, the complexity or simplicity of it. When we talk about resources, we are saying the human resource. Now for this service, there are two human resources that are very important. So your supply side. So these are the researchers, the knowledge brokers who bring the evidence to the policymakers. But the demand side human resource, who are the policymakers, who actually make use of the service, are also important. We also talk finances, we also talk time in many things. So each of these thematic categories does have some descriptive categories within it. So what we found was also very consistent with many other scholars. So there was a study, a 75 meta-analysis study, that also found that there were three characteristics that are very, very consistent, especially in design, and significant for uptake. So your relative advantage, are you meeting an obvious gap? Does this gap actually, is it obvious? It might be obvious to you, is it obvious to your users? Okay, how about compatibility with the values and norms? Most of the users will want a safety net. So things like cultural shock, like, we've been doing things this way, tomorrow we start the other way, are things that might affect their decisions to take this up. How about the complexity? You've all gone to, probably try to speak to your customer care service, maybe for your phone or something, and they call and say, press 2. Press 4, press 6, a policymaker is probably not going to wait like 6 hours to be able to tell you what their problem is. So how simple is the service you're offering to them? And even if I show these categories and themes as direct loops, that the design directly affects uptake, or the visibility directly affects uptake, they are longer loops within themselves as well that affect uptake at the end of the day. So for instance, a better design, or your design will increase your visibility of the service, which will enhance your relationships and networks, which might attract you more resources, leading you to have a better design, leading you, to better uptake, And so there are direct loops in there, but there are also longer loops that get us to where we are at the end of the day. And ultimately, we're working through kind of iterative cycles within these components. Now, we said, okay, now we understand the contextual factors, but now the things that we produce on here, could they actually put people off? So we decided to explore policymakers' experiences with the rapid response briefs that come off this. So these were briefs to address the health systems and technology questions, as you saw in the model and the scope that we're handling. So we said, let's see what the experiences are. And we decided to use usability methods. So user testing, and we used this honeycomb framework by Peter Morvile. It has 7 facets. So with it, you're able to get, to get the policymaker to go through a task or to look at this brief and say, is it useful? Do you find this brief useful? is it usable? You know, they might find it useful, but they can't even find their way around it. You know, can you find what it is you're looking for? Do you find it credible? It might be useful, but you're doubting, you know, the thing. So at the end of the day, what is the value that they actually put on this? So Peter Mobile takes the value from he would take value from my perspective, you know, after talking to these people, what value do I put on this brief? But in this work, we put the value at the end of the day, we ask these people, what is the value you put on this? We also added one facet from the modified framework by Sarah Rosenbaum, where she adds two facets, affiliation and understandability. And we picked up understandability to be a part of this. So we used interviews, scenario-based interviews, and we based this on original and revised templates. So we had the template that we started with and gave this to the policymakers to find out how they feel about it. But the information, the feedback that we got, we used to continue to make the template better and better. So that is why you see revised templates in there as well. And then we use the concurrent think aloud method. So this is when you give somebody a task, and as they perform that task, you're asking them to think aloud, to voice whatever it is that they feel about the task. So we coded our findings in terms of major problems, big frustration, minor issues. So major problems were those where this person picks up this report, they begin to read it, and they get really frustrated and just put it away. They won't continue. Big frustrations are the ones where they will find a hurdle. You know, it gets in the way of their reading, but they're able to get over it and continue with their reading. And then minor issues are really minor. They might be, you know, cosmetic and things like that. But the problem with big frustrations and minor issues is that when they recur, they actually become major problems and people will put these away. So it's important to pay attention to them. So we carried out a number of tests between 2010 and 2013. And we spoke to a number of policy makers who had different backgrounds and different levels in the health system as well. So some of the findings, for instance, findability. Findability, the domain of findability means the extent to which the product is navigable and the user can locate and easily find what they need. So we didn't find any major problems. So nobody was putting this away because they couldn't find what they're looking for. But people were complaining about the first page having a lot of information, too many logos, too many key messages, you know, some of the minor issues, they said there were information boxes that were, you know, distracting. They also disliked, you know, that the fact that headings were presented in the form of questions. So we put this together with the positive feedback and the suggestions they had. And what we changed was that we said, okay, let's leave only the main logos on the front page. Others move to the back. And also logos that are left should be made smaller. We didn't set a number of key messages, but we said, let's make this minimum. And we revised the information that's in the information boxes as well. When it came to usability, the ease of use of this product, again, we didn't find anyone putting this away because of that, but they felt, you know, a few of them felt the report seemed lengthy. And also the methods of how the report had been arrived at were in some small, you know, information box on the second page, you could easily miss it. And there was also a huge complaint about the absence of recommendations. And we said, okay, using this information, let's make this report aim for 5 to 7 pages. Later, in the second iterative user testing, we even made that lower to 4 pages. And to try and balance, you know, this thing of the report seems lengthy, but then we want more information about the methods. We said, all right, let's just put a reference where people can actually go and read as much as they can about how we got here. So we were then able to move from this first version, as you will see, the real complaint of the fact that it had so much information on the first page, and went to a second version, and then went to a third version. So this third version is what then, you know, stayed and is still being used today. You will see that definitely, you know, it looks lighter, even when, you know, when you just look at the first page compared to the first one, which had a really heavy front. So with all of this information, we thought we'd made some contributions to the field. The substantial contribution we felt that the evidence of the feasibility of rapid response services in Uganda is now not questionable, and any other similar settings. And its establishment, we've established that there is a practical path you can actually take to get to a rapid response service. We also have presented a format, a tested format for presenting research evidence about health systems for urgent needs when policymakers need evidence. Theoretically, we've come up with a theoretical framework for factors important for the establishment of a rapid response service in a low-income country. And to this, not only have we come up with our own framework, we also have come up with a modification to the life cycle theory, adding a stage of replication. We also have formulated a theoretical framework on factors that are associated with the uptake of rapid response services in Uganda and probably similar settings. Methodologically, we use some of the non-traditional methods to meet our objectives. So for example, user testing, at the time we started this work, was not very common in the health sciences. And we were using real users, concurrent think aloud method. I think where it had been used, a lot of it was the retrospective think aloud method. So I leave you to complete your task, and then I come back and ask, how did you feel about it? And in that case, you know, you're running things, you're running risks of recall bias, and also missing out on that real-time sort of expressions that people have when they're going through the concurrent think aloud method. What this implies for our policy and practice is that now we know rapid response services are feasible. They are a feasible option to address barriers of timeliness and relevance of high quality evidence for decision making in low and middle income countries. So this is something that we can make use of. And the theoretical framework of factors that are important for the establishment should now provide managers who have limited experience or no experience with these things at all, with information to be able to establish in a more evidence-informed way. You know, they now know what happens when and how. And also knowledge brokers who provide evidence to policymakers now know that it's not only important to present this research evidence, but how you actually present it. So we've presented a quick guide and a format for how this can actually be done. We've also highlighted the replication for innovations, that this is very important. It presents the fact that the innovation is sitting in a growing field, and it ensures the continuity of that field. What we did not do in this work, which can now build on it, so research that can continue from here, is that yes, we know rapid response services can do, you know, some good stuff, but at what cost? Okay, so the efficiency of rapid response services is something now we need to find out. So some costing and cost effectiveness studies would be good. We also need to now validate some of the tools that were used on the service. These tools are being picked up by a few other services, but now they need to be validated to be able to be standardized. Comparison studies would be good. We now know what happens in Uganda, what happens in other jurisdictions. We all know that knowledge translation and things similar to this are very context specific and context sensitive. So comparison studies would be a very good thing to build onto this. Also at the subnational level. So we know what happens at the national level, but what is it that happens, say, at district level in terms of using evidence for decisions? We also need some theoretical studies to be able to predict these as strategies now. And we also need to understand how do these actually work when implemented at full scale. In terms of strengths, we think that we had some strength. This was the first evaluation of a rapid response service in a low-income country. And we used a range of concepts, you know, from varied fields and multiple methods to get different lenses on this one service. But each of the studies, you know, that went into this can actually independently feed into decisions of a health system. The limitations, we actually narrowly focused on the rapid response service alone with no relation to other strategies for knowledge translation, which might limit, you know, our holistic understanding of how this works. However, I think that a deeper understanding of these services on their own is a very good start to be able to talk about how they relate with other studies. So in conclusion, we basically went out to study a rapid response service in Uganda as a low-income country in a bid to understand, whether it was feasible, and if it is, how does it work? And we used, a combination of methods to be able to do this. We found that they are feasible. We were able to track how they're established. We were also able to identify some of the factors that actually are important for this. And we also determined, what factors would affect utilization, which factors are modifiable and probably applicable in many similar settings. We also explored how, policymakers experience the products that come off these services. And all of these studies together have, brought together some substantial methodological and theoretical contributions to the body of knowledge. They have, however, also left some areas for research to be able to build onto this work. Now, this is the end of my dissertation work, my presentation. I would like to share with you just one other slide. If you do remember, when I was talking about the conceptual framework, I talked about the latent consequences, that you could actually build this service aiming to, have a service that provides policymakers with timely evidence. But there are things that could actually come of it. And if you're not recognizing them, you could easily miss opportunities. So some of the latent consequences that have come of this moved from the project that we talked about, the project that began in 2010. And now it has become a center that spends close to $1 million every year. It has also inspired several other rapid response services since then. Remember, it was the first in a low and middle income country. Now we have seen rapid response services, sort of come up over this decade. And the ones that I show here are the ones directly connected to us, the ones that we have gone out and helped to set up. So we have a number of them in Africa, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, in the Americas as well, in Europe and in the Middle East. And all of these have actually begun a whole new science. And this is a replication I was talking about. They've begun a whole new science because each of these, like I said, is working in a very different context. And so there are contextual lessons coming off, there are modifications, new theories being built, and a new science coming out of this. And because of that, there's resulted lots of people having to be trained to be a part of this. So more than 200 trainees and mentees that we have been a part of. And these are not just the producers and brokers, but also users of evidence to understand and make use of this. The rapid response service has also now gone beyond the health sector. In Uganda alone, it now works also in the education sector, the gender sector. It works with cross-cutting sectors. It works with Parliament, the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Office of the President. It's also working with international partners. And we have also gone on to see what is it that works actually at the sub-national level and at the district level. But I think what we are mostly proud of is how we are now sharing lessons. So we are sharing our experiences and lessons. So this is part of a book that we wrote with the Institute of Development Studies in the UK, where we were talking about complexities of knowledge translation. And the chapter is entirely on reflections about this rapid response mechanism. This is a book also that came out last year from colleagues in South Africa, talking about lessons from Africa, about using evidence in policy and practice. And there's 2 chapters in there, basically dedicated on experiences that this rapid response mechanism I was talking about has actually come up with. Now, not only do we share experiences and lessons, we also are beginning to contribute to guidance. So this is guidance from the World Health Organization, the Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research in particular, in which again, we contributed 2 chapters talking about rapid response mechanisms and how these can actually take advantage of using rapid reviews to strengthen health policy and systems. And this, lastly, is a toolkit that has been prepared by the service that I have shared with you this morning, a toolkit for rapid response services in low and middle income countries. So much as we aimed to present evidence to policymakers, there is a lot of latent consequences that have come out of this. And I wanted to share this to give that service context as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you, Prof.
Okay, excellent. So congratulations and with what you've achieved and with this project, and it's fantastic to hear the impact of and what has been happening since the completion of your work. So the one of my first question would be, if you should be going back to the starting point, or if you should be starting with your PhD now, will you be doing anything differently?
Yes. Sorry about that. Okay. I think one of the things I would do differently, one, I know a lot now about this work than I knew then. So I would be starting from a point where the rapid response service is not on its own. So it's sitting within a framework of many knowledge translation strategies. So I would be going back in a way that I'm not trying to prove that it works, but I want to see how does it work, you know, in combination with other strategies. How does it work at different levels of the health system? How does it work with different levels of resources? Because at the time, these were things that were missing and were really starting with no blueprint. There is a bit of a blueprint now, and I would want to understand how do rapid response services actually now fit in with everything that we know. Of course, there are situations that have also made things better. So when we started this, we were really convincing people that you can actually make policy decisions within a short period of time. And there were questions about who makes policy in a short period of time, you know? Now, we have the benefit of things like the COVID-19 situation, where we don't have to prove that you can actually make policy overnight. So we have the advantage. So if I was going back now, I would only be looking to see how does this work with everything else? What amount of resources do I need? But not kind of trying to prove its feasibility, because we do have advantage now.
Great, thank you. So my next question is, if you consider...
Prof, you might be muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? I can hear you very well.
I doubt she is.
Can you hear me now, Rhona?
I can hear you, Taryn. I think the problem is on their end.
Oh, thank you, Andy.
Okay.
Wonder if I should just...
We can hear you well now.
Okay, great. So, oh, it's a bit of an echo. So my next question is, if you now reflect on your methods that you used, so I mean, the big thing with PhD is the research methods and the research that you employ. So if you think of the methods that you used, can you reflect on the validity of what you've done, and what may be some threats to the validity of the research?
Okay, so we mostly used a case study, you know, and everything was then employed within the case study. So our process evaluation came into the case study. Now, case studies do have a strength in terms of giving us in-depth focus study of the elements, you know, that we are studying. So in this case, you know, we have this in-depth focus on the rapid response services. So the weakness might be that you might not be able to generalize, to come up with a generalization, you know, to other, you know, other jurisdictions, other cases. This might be a problem. They're also subject to bias, and also probably prone to the researcher bias. Also, especially in this case, you know, part of my methods, I use the participant observer, you know, strategy. So all of that could actually subject me to bias as the researcher, but also the difficulty in replicating this because it was a case study. But what I think is that this was very appropriate. The case study itself was appropriate because what we wanted to understand was about this single phenomenon of a service, how it actually works in this particular setting, how feasible is it, what does it do, in this setting. So I do think that in terms of its, being a case study, I think it was appropriate. In terms of the participant observer issue, which we incorporated in each of this, participant observer is basically a process that enables researchers to learn about the activities of, the people or the phenomenon which they are trying to study in its natural setting, through observing, but also participating in the activities. And it's a process of learning through exposure to or involvement in the day-to-day routine activities of those participants. Very commonly used in the sociological and anthropological studies. It's so one might look at it as, well, you are the executor and you're measuring yourself, aren't you biased within that? But actually some of the advantages is that it prevents reflexivity. So it prevents people reacting or acting appropriately because they're being observed or they're being studied. So the researcher comes from out and they realize you've arrived, so they do things in a certain way. But it also gives you entry or access to the backstage culture. So the setting that shapes behavior and leads to what we eventually see. So organizations have unspoken cultures, things happen, you as an outsider, you won't know why they used a certain word or why they arrive at a certain time. But if you are a participant, it gives you that advantage. And it also helps, so then as the researcher, you will be asking questions or you'll be shaping your questions, you'll be shaping your guides in a way that is natively in context or it's culturally relevant, you sort of ask what is relevant. And in fact, if we are talking validity, it may be used, participant observation may be used to increase validity of a study because the observations help the researcher to have a better understanding of the context that they are studying. So you don't make assumptions, you're actually a part of them. Now this validity could actually be made stronger if we use additional methods, and we did as well. So you're talking additional methods like document reviews, you're interviewing people, you're using certain questionnaires to answer particular issues, and also using some quantitative methods where you're able to. And so you're able to increase the validity that you have started off with it. Now, to also counteract the potential biases in this study, because of the participant observer issue, I involved colleagues in the design of the study and in the interpretation of the results, and also writing up these findings to ensure that it wasn't just my biases that are feeding into what I am reporting.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that detailed and comprehensive answer and reflecting on the issues of validity. So continuing with the methods, broadly in terms of PhD studies, what would you see would be the value of including evidence synthesis as a component within a PhD? And how do you see that potentially having fitted into your own PhD?
So evidence synthesis as a component in a PhD, I think is a plus. So what we have at the moment is something similar to what we do at the master's level. What we commonly call a literature review. But this literature review does not have boundaries, I could say. All you are required to do is to prove that you know your field, but with no particular boundaries. Now, evidence synthesis is, first of all, a transparent process, but also a very systematic process that requires certain criteria to say that you have done a rapid review or a systematic review or some, a narrative review. So they are criteria that you have to fulfill. And I think that at PhD level, we cannot be doing the abstract or something without a particular definition of a literature review. I think that if we put evidence synthesis at that level, it definitely is a plus. But also too, it actually gives you a certain skill. So to be able to do evidence synthesis, you do need certain knowledge and certain skills to be able to achieve it. And I think that at PhD level, these are the kinds of skills that people should be able to have and add on to, the contextual knowledge, the other knowledge of their topical knowledge, the content. But the methodological skills of evidence synthesis, I think, are a plus for a PhD level student.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And thinking of rapid response services and the research that you've done and the implication for research that you've put forward, what would you say are some questions for evidence synthesis to be done about aspects linked to rapid response services?
Okay, so what I have put forward in terms of rapid response services and what else we now need to know is their efficiency. So there is a lot of excitement that they have generated, but we do not know at what cost and how they actually compare with other services. Are we actually going for something that takes up more resources than it's actually giving? Are we actually using something that is helping us save resources compared to other strategies? And this is not to actually even say comparison per se, but the complementariness, because each of these strategies, I think, has a place. And so when the rapid response mechanisms come and fit into this framework, at what cost are they coming? So efficiency. And then, of course, for this particular service, and also comparing with past literature like Judith Healy's literature, what does it take to actually run a rapid response service at full scale? But also, at the time, they were thinking about a regional mechanism. Which regional mechanism would take advantage of, resources from different inputs, from different countries? Is this something also that could be run in different regions? One of the things that we're seeing on this rapid response service is that sometimes you have to draw on other persons. So some of the people we have trained in other countries, when the heat is so high, you might call on, say, a librarian from that country to give you 2 days or things like that. What would it take then for a regional mechanism? Say if there was an East African or Eastern and Southern, rapid response mechanism, what would that take? So there's still things that we would like to know about these services. How about in the different jurisdictions? So at the national level, we know how it works very well and we know why it works. We're still trying to learn what does it mean to run such a service at the district level where they do more implementation. And probably when you want to evaluate the policy, you also need to go down there. How do things work at that level as compared to what they work like at the central level? So there's still a lot that we need to learn.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So there's some really neat projects for master students or for future PhD students that you may be supervising to move things forward. And I hear quite a few questions that you've put forward for evidence synthesis, which will really be great to combine experiences and approaches and successes and challenges that the rapid response services have faced. So I want to come a little bit to the rapid response service itself. And I mean, you've mentioned within the COVID context now, you don't have to convince decision makers anymore about the value of evidence-informed decision making. I think it's really, there's a high level of sensitization around that. And the other thing with COVID, because we are every country is faced with it is that everybody is responding and needing evidence. So inadvertently, what's happening is that there's a lot of duplication of efforts. So I would like you to comment on how do you see ways of reducing duplication of efforts in preparing these rapid reviews or other products of a rapid response service.
So you are right when you talk about a lot of duplication happening. And I think on one of the things that such a service would help with, if we carried out the regional mechanism, as I said earlier, you will find that within a region, you're probably grappling with the same issues. You know, you're grappling with the same issues at about the same time. So again, if I use the example of COVID, so it looked like a wave that was, you know, moving from the west coming to say to Africa, or from the north coming to the south, and the issues we're grappling with at a certain point were not the same issues that were being grappled with our colleagues in the north, but then they were similar in our particular setting. And if you had a service that actually serves more than just a country, so for instance, if we had such a service that is seated, say, at the World Health Organization, you know, AFRO, at WHO AFRO, or that supports WHO AFRO, so then AFRO is giving out, you know, the information to its member states, or the East African community doing that for its member states. So a regional mechanism is one way of avoiding duplication, you know, within states, but also, you know, networks. So one of the things that has been noted with knowledge translation platforms or knowledge translation brokers, brokerage institutions, many of them are working in silos. So there's lots of us doing the same thing and not communicating to each other. So you find that, you know, so recently we were doing some work where we were trying to compile information about COVID-19 and primary health care, you know, how countries had been responding to this, and we're doing this as part of a project called Primacies. And I attempted to speak to one person, and he informed me that he had actually answered the, you know, similar questions, in fact, the same questions, you know, 3 times before me. And we're all talking the same thing. We're all synthesizing the same information, but not speaking to each other. So networks and partnerships within knowledge translation platforms are very, very important to be able to stop or to reduce the duplication. But also the other thing we need to be very careful about is, what is duplication? Because many of these questions and synthesis are very context specific and context sensitive, as I said earlier. And so it might be a question whose context has slightly changed, or whose context is evolving, you know? Again, you know, we talk about COVID-19 and how it evolves almost every other day. So duplication also has to keep in mind, or the concerns about duplication have to keep in mind about the ever-changing contexts of certain processes, and also to keep in mind that there are no 2 policy processes that are similar. And therefore, when people are doing these things over and over again, we need to ensure that, are they doing actually the same thing, or are they actually responding to you know, slightly different situations? The other thing is about you know, stopping duplication or reducing duplication in evidence synthesis is about a question that we frequently answer about these briefs. Are they updated? You know, so something akin or similar to what is done for systematic reviews. And I guess it's in one way also, you know, stopping the duplication process. Now, for these rapid or these evidence synthesis on a service similar to the rapid response service are not updated. And that is because of the context in which a question comes. So most of these questions, they might be similar. It might be the same question that was asked 10 years ago, but the context might be changing. And it's very, very important to pay attention to that. Where it looks kind of similar, you'll pick up your brief, update it, but update it not only in terms of the evidence, but also the context-specific issues that it brings up.
Thank you. In your response, I mean, you've highlighted the importance of networking and collaboration between the evidence synthesis community, and you refer to silos. And I mean, the reference to that comes up very often, that there's criticisms that the communities are working in silos. Why do you think that's the case? Why is it the continued criticism?
I guess it's contributed to by so many things. I don't know how many times I've gone to a conference in a foreign country and I have found people from Uganda and I have no idea that they do exactly what I do or something similar. We are able to communicate or collaborate more on the other side, than over here. But I think it's the lack of information sharing. We're not sharing information about who's doing what, what are they doing? And I think many times also as researchers, we may tend to see ourselves as competitors. Now, especially for researchers in low and middle income countries, they are walking a survival path. They are trying, we are sort of competing for the same resources. So I might be applying to a certain funder or looking to network with somebody, and I might see you doing the same thing more as competition than collaboration. I think there's a lot of feeling of competition other than collaboration, which should actually not be, because I think, I tend to think we're all doing the same thing. Sorry, we are aiming for the same thing, but coming at it differently. And if we just brought our, different methods together, we might be able to achieve bigger. We might be able to share resources. And, where this has happened, we definitely have seen that. But I know that one of the things is the lack of information sharing. There's not, either we don't have the portals that really talk about who's doing what where, but also there's not those there are no deliberate platforms where we sort of come together and say, this is a platform where knowledge translation people come. There've been a few efforts. So I can cite, for instance, in the knowledge translation world, there is KTNet Africa, which was an initiative that I'm not too sure whether it has carried on. But this was an initiative that was trying to bring, people who do evidence synthesis in Africa, together to share lessons. You could even share resources. You could share information. I think more and more platforms like that will make things better. But definitely we are working in silos, probably most of the time not intentionally, but because information sharing is quite poor.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So it would be useful to talk some more about the collaborative efforts. So back to rapid response services. And one of the issues that one have with project funding is that you have funding for start and end period, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to set up a certain initiative, and then the funding ends. So can you comment on the sustainability of rapid response services and what are key considerations?
Yes. So sustainability is a question that, we began to think about almost 6-7 years ago, and yes, it was in the context of the funding mechanisms or the funding styles that most of our work begins with. A lot of our work starts as projects that have a certain lifespan, okay? 3, 4, 5, if you're lucky, 10 years, but they do have a lifespan that's going to come at, to the end at some point. But the issue is, when this funding is going on, you have lots of resources to do lots of things. You have, enough funding to be able, or adequate funding to be able to have the kind of capacity, say, you're looking for. So you want to have a certain number of researchers, that funding might be able to take care of it because of how you designed your project. So I tend to say it's lab-like. So you design this lab where things are really going to work, and they do work because that's the funding you will be provided. Then you will get the outputs and outcomes that we see, and we will say this thing works. And then the funding comes to an end. And either you have to go out again and find funding along those lines, or you say goodbye to everybody. This was nice. We saw some really nice outcomes, but this is about it. And I think that's very problematic because we start things, and one of the other strategies that many of us then do is to hand this over to a government ministry or a government structure that might not have the same capacity, especially in terms of funding, to be able to run exactly what it is that we've been running. Within a year, it probably is going down, and we tend to think that it's how they run it, but actually it's the capacity in terms of funds and many other things. And so one of the things that we encourage or have been really reflecting on is to make a design where your pay model or your model of funding is not dependent on the 2-3 year, start stop kind of model, because not only does it affect, yes, your funding, but it also affects your users. So when you have those times when you go down because there's no funds and then you're beginning another period, it actually cuts. It brings a cut to your services and also the sustainability of this whole service. Remember, it's dependent on the users. So when the users know that you're not active, and then next year you're active, and then the next year you're really not, and then it does affect. So in terms of sustainability, I think most of these services have to start thinking right away. If you think what you are doing is beneficial, what is the model then that can actually make it sustainable? So what we have done with the service here, which I shared a little bit, was to translate it into a center which then has core funding, and these, the activities are able to go on and not in project style. And I think many of, some of the conversations we've had also with the users, we've held a policy dialogue about this in particular with our users. And they were talking about, sometimes you need to put a model. After your users really understand the benefit of using this service, there might be a model for which they actually might pay a small fee, whatever it is you need to do to ensure that these services are not cut as they go along. So it's very important to think about the model that you have for sustainability.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thanks. Yes, that key considerations that you're highlighting. I just want you to comment a little bit more for me on the center that you've mentioned as a strategy for sustainability, and the weighing up positioning a rapid response service within government versus within an academic institution.
Mm-hmm. So the center that the center now has, or it's a recognized center of the university. It's a recognized center of the university. One, that gives it credibility, especially with people who might work with it in terms of its sustainability, but it also then is able to get certain resources that it would have to look for itself if it wasn't, part of the university. So there's a lot of support, both administrative and financial, that would come as a recognized center of the university. But also now you're able to do a little more. And this little more actually then is able to contribute to your sustainability. So the trainings that are done by this center, it's recognized that it's a place where you can actually send students, to do their internships. You have fellows, exchanges with other, with fellows coming from other institutions. And a lot of this contributes to its sustainability. But also now you're able to sign I could call them agreements and memorandum of understanding that are longer lasting and have an effect on how the center can actually stay sustainable and sustain itself. And also you're able to carry out activities that bring income to the center, unlike when you are a project and you are unable to do that. Now, there are issues about where you put such a service. So you could put this service at a university like ourselves, or you could put it at a government institution, say a Ministry of Health, you could put it elsewhere, but government versus uni. So each of these has advantages, it has some disadvantages. So for instance, if you set it up at a university like we are, you have access to certain resources that say people in government would not be able to. So for example, evidence. We have more access to, to evidence and to databases because of being at a university. So this is in the context of using research evidence. But also universities tend to be looked at as credible. There's a credibility that comes with you preparing. I think, many of us have had our own president or many people saying, oh, I got this from the scientists in Makerere. There's something that comes with that. There's a credibility that comes with it. But then the downside to it is that you're seen as an outsider to the policymaking process. And many times you might miss the real context of why things are being done the way they're being done, because you're not part of the conversations that go on in the policy arena. And yet being part of government, for instance, if this was set in a Ministry of Health or another government institution, the advantages are that you actually are part of the policy-making conversation. So you can even anticipate where things are going. You're able to do things in context. But the downside is that you're also very prone to being muddled with, you're part of the process that is making the decision. So the risk of, people muddling with you is quite higher than they would, at a university. And so one has to really weigh the costs and benefits of placing their service where they do.
Thanks for putting forward your thoughts on that consideration. So my last question that I want to ask you, which stems to the implications of the research that you've done and what you found linked to rapid response services. So you are at a conference and you are about to get into the lift and you step in, and there, lo and behold, is the head of WHO. Okay, and you have an opportunity for a minute to talk about rapid response services and the role it can play. What will you say?
I would say to him or her, I have the solution to all his problems. Okay, I would really say, after the pleasantries, very short pleasantries, we have only a minute. I would introduce myself and say, I have been working on something that promises or that has proven it can actually support urgent policy making, with evidence, and really put confidence in that, in the policies or the processes. And I would offer to meet up and give him more information, him or her, or to send more information. But most importantly, I would want to, be present and explain, where things might need clarity. So one of the things I would really be lobbying for with him or her is to have as many rapid response services as there can be in different member states. I would also be lobbying, of course, for resources not necessarily finance alone, but in terms of support for capacity building. So one of the things that this suffers from is the capacity to be able to synthesize the evidence. But I think the biggest one is the capacity to use evidence. And the WHO itself has actually highlighted the fact, WHO Afro especially, has highlighted the fact that there's a lot of rhetoric about use of evidence, for policies and decisions. But in terms of action, one of the first things they see when there is a meeting and they are putting budgets together, the budget that first disappears is the budget towards knowledge translation. And that has highlighted to them how member states are actually putting value to using evidence for policy making. And so one of the things I would be lobbying for is, one, to first get the capacity of users to be able to understand the benefit of this, but also to be able to get the skill. Using knowledge or using evidence for policy making requires certain skills. And many of our users might want to do this, but do not have the skill to be able to do it. So those are some of the things that I would be lobbying for. Those are some of the things that I would be lobbying for, that not only should the rapid response services be replicated in as many places as possible, but to be able to build the capacity in terms of knowledge and skill so people can actually appreciate their benefit.
Thank you. Thanks, Rhona. We'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Young, for wonderfully engaging Dr. Rhona in this intellectual discourse. We've all enjoyed it. We shall allow you to have some rest as we continue with the rest of the panelists, but please stay online, Professor. So thank you. And our next examiner will be Professor Freddie Ssengooba. Please, Professor, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to see any sound check for my colleagues. I'm not sure how it is being captured.
Can you all hear Professor Ssengooba?
No.
Can they hear you?
So I'll try to share. So, Rhona, I want to thank you for the wonderful work that you've done. And as you said, it's taken a decade plus. And I think that shows commitment and dedication to the knowledge translation and the innovation of rapid response. I enjoyed reading your work. And I think as to continue smoothly from where Professor and opponent just left, you had just said, I think as you're summarizing, knowledge and skills for running this service is critical.
Yes.
Great. So if I was to start there, and one of the studies you started with was feasibility.
Mm.
Looking at that study, how would you change it to emphasize these findings about knowledge and skill come out? Because I didn't find them.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least didn't find enough. How do you change that study?
Yes.
To be able to make this statement you just made?
I think one of the things that we did not appraise in that study is that, yes, it's feasible, but what makes it? So one of the things I would change in that study is, so can you actually describe what this feasible thing is? What is it made of? And what, in terms of levels, so if you are to meet a certain capacity, what exactly do you need? Say in terms of personnel, in terms of time, if I combine those two, person time, how much is needed? In terms of remuneration, what kind of skills and qualifications do these people need? So I would change it in such a way that not only do we just prove it is feasible, it's possible that it's feasible you're using one person who's dying, and how sustainable is that? It's also possible that it's feasible you're using 100 people to answer 2 questions a year. How efficient is that? So I would change it in such a way that we really define that at a certain level of output, this is what you actually need in terms of different resources.
Another way to just add on that, just I conclude on that question, is they said, for example, the center is now serving education and very soon will be serving other sectors.
Yes.
So what internally has happened to ensure that it is feasible, for example, to serve civil aviation or agriculture, or for example, other sectors that I could easily mention, maybe trade.
Trade, yes.
What is it that has happened to the center to be able to do more? And if other demands or asks or requests come, how does the feasibility get assessed to be able to say no or yes?
Okay. So what the center has done, and you know, this started off with, it started off almost as soon as the Rapid Response Service started its work, because the background to it is that we would have these rapid response questions, which sometimes would go on to input into a policy dialogue. Now, when you're having a policy dialogue, it will be multi-sectoral. So you're talking about food. You're probably not going to bring nutritionists along, but you will bring all the way to people who sell food, you know, so trade might come in. You'll have the agriculturalists, you have, you know, all kinds of people. And when they realized what was inputting on some of these dialogues, they said, can we not have this also in, you know, can we not have this? So we had so many requests coming from different sectors. And for a long time we said no, and no, and no, we don't have the capacity. We are really health medical people. But as this continued, we realized even within the health sector itself, we're not even experts at like 20%, okay? And so how is it that we are answering these other 80% that we're not experts at, and then we get, if you remember, satisfaction with answers at almost 100%. So we realized that we are process experts. And even if you bring it as a hypothesis, it's actually something that has already happened. I think 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, the center was asked to synthesize evidence from 3 different countries. Only one of them was Uganda. The other was India, Pakistan, an Asian country, and Ghana. And the topics were tax, trade, child labor, you know. So what we realize is that we are process experts. So you can send us, give us any topic, we'll go and bring everything, okay? So we've got the skill and to be able to find the evidence wherever it is. The skill we do not have is to be able to synthesize and say, this is important, this is contextual, you know, relevant, because we are not experts in that content. So now what we have, that for any extra capacity that we need to do, if we were going into trade, the team will have to have access to content experts in the trade ministry. The team is doing work now in the education sector. They will do all the finding of education content, education information and evidence. But there's got to be an educationist, a person who has content expert, either as part of the team, or they may join the team at the time they are needed. So that is the change that we have been making.
So in the work, basically, as it is right now, and you've written 4 research chapters, where will I find the assessment of the process expertise that you've acquired as you doing this work? Which chapter would that be?
So that is not there yet. There is an ongoing study. I think they've just published a protocol, if I'm not mistaken, which is supposed to actually assess the kinds of things that you're asking for. Because, and this is something that, you know, the service has promised to do severally, but with limited resources, we managed to get, you know, a huge funding for it, because we need an external person to come. We can't still be the same one saying, you know, we have executed, we are good here, we are, this is how things work. So we do have an external person actually carrying out this work.
Great, thank you. So I will not repeat the question that Professor your opponent asked about this area of systematic review, because that's where the process expertise I believe lies, but somehow you've not had opportunity to expound on what skills you have actually acquired, or what another center might have to do to acquire those expertise to be process experts.
Yes.
Yet this work is really what should other countries be able to do to scale up. There may be some missed opportunity there. I don't know how you think it can be fixed.
I can. So I think that it is a missed opportunity to actually expound on that, and I think we shall revise the work to include that, because we, you know, for us to claim that we are giving guidance, that people can now read this and be able to start their own, I think that's important information. So some of the skills, and so we coined this CACs, abbreviation about what you need, you know, to be able to run this. So there's certain knowledge that you need, okay? So knowledge, certain attitude. By the way, not everybody can actually work. Yeah. You might have the knowledge, the qualifications and the skills, but it requires a certain attitude as well. And of course, qualifications and certain skills. So of course, being a process expert, you should be able to have such skills. So you should be able to navigate different databases. You should be able to appraise evidence. Not everything out there is actually good and appropriate. You should be able to summarize very easily, to write, to communicate. Not all communication will be about writing. Sometimes we take back briefs and the policymaker says, hey, that's the meeting I'm going for. Just tell me in 5 sentences what you found, you know? So you should be able to communicate. You should be able to manage time. Time management.
That's like I want to manage. Now, thank you very much. Yes. I think I want to move to the second question. Chair, let me know when my time is done. Yeah. But I have 2 interesting pieces I wanted to interact with Rhona on. So one is on methods. Yes. I very much love the fact that you used case studies. Yes. And within there, you've used participant observation, or at least methodologies that allow you to be part of this phenomenon and be able to learn from it. And you said from the start how useful and the strength it has. And I think it is very powerful, and you've used it in all fairness very well. Thank you. But I do have a small question. Maybe to phrase this question, I might need to give some analogy. Okay. Just like you give the life cycle. Yes. I used to love race car, and when I was young, I used to stand on the road. Yes. And I would see these speeding cars and how they make corners and the dust and the sound they make. Yes. Then there will be those who are seated in the car. One is a driver and the other one is a co-driver. And I believe there will be a master somewhere who has made the routes. Yes. In all of those, which position do you think you hold in this work? So I have held a number of positions. And incidentally, in the framework about establishment, one of the things I highlight is how people move from one position to another, and they have to be very alert or sensitive to realize the time to move. So I started off as a rapid response service officer, so the program officer, really doing the kind of work that I've been explaining, the day-to-day work, contacting the policymakers, trying to understand, clarifying things with them, presenting these things to them, sensitizing them. And then over the period of time, I have moved on to be what you would say part of the technical leadership, where we now have a bigger team, and I might not do the day-to-day work of speaking with these people, but now giving guidance and building skill and giving direction, but also moving a little into what we term as the political leadership, being the liaison with the policy arena as well. So that said now, and this, I had an issue with the question of participant observer. Are you an observer in this sense? Or are you actually the architect and the director? Because you actually say here, I think that's page 30. The
Yes.
researcher of this study was the participant observer, the main implementer of the intervention
Yes.
that was under study. She's involved in the designing, piloting, and scaling up of the intervention. She later collected and analyzed data to evaluate the intervention.
Yes.
It looks like you are everywhere. Is that an observer, or is that something more?
Okay, so I think it depends on the timing of what was done when. So for instance, at the time of, what study can I pick? Say, for instance, let's say the user testing. So we are talking about coming to these people that you have already provided a service for. So you have been working with them, probably continue working with them.
I know where you are going, but my question is, how else would you frame your study method if it, other than participant observation? What other ways would you actually communicate all this that you've done, but still stay true to a method which allows you to be all these things?
It might be better in some of the qualitative methods.
Like which
I would say.
study methods that allow you to be active, those are which ones?
The ethnography or the grounded theory that we use.
Have you heard of action research?
Oh, yes.
What does it entail?
So action research, and I'm really pulling on information from very far. You are part of the research, you're participating, but you're also, I think, giving space for more observers other than yourself. So it doesn't rely on you being everything in that particular.
Look, I think I'm going to move on. That's what I wanted you to at least get to.
Yes.
And there are also a version of it. There is what they call action learning, which is part of that, which I believe more or less embraces the various roles you've covered. But having said that, maybe that leads me to a small which I don't know that I should go there, but let me ask, because it's fundamental to research.
Okay.
When you have been involved in so many of these roles in any research, generally we are required to indicate when you're publishing conflict of interest. How did you handle that as you're publishing and indicating the various roles you have had?
I think the most important thing was just really highlighting that I was a participant observer. So then people really know.
Declaring no conflict of interest. But I think, do you think you did the right thing, or you should have declared some interest? Because if you go to, maybe I should ask you, what are the various things that you're required to declare when you have any interest? Do you know the interest you have to declare?
Funding interests, of course, if you were part, of the work itself, or had a very close relationship, with the people you study.
You think yours is close or not?
Very close.
Okay, so I think I just said that. I thought there would have been some declaration. At least just to say I was part of this, designed it, and also but I was able to relax these, as you say, reflection. Good. If Chair allows me a couple of minutes, I think I'll just try to go to one thing which I think you found strongly. You have a method, I think in the study number, is it 3? Where you're using testing these briefs. And you have a method which categorizes your finding into major, big, and the minor. Among the big is that, and you repeated it here, that participants had huge complaints about absence of recommendation. You have it in several areas of that study. I just wanted to learn from your work and maybe advice you would give to other researchers. If you do a research and you find that actually your research subjects are giving you something, you call it big, maybe not major, but not minor. But at the end of the day, I think you basically ignore them and say they need to be educated about why this is not going to happen. How would you, if you're going to teach such students,
what is
How
this?
do you handle that if you were able to say, but I'm finding this,
Yes,
but I have to throw it away because
Exactly.
people don't understand?
yes.
Can you address for me that bit and then I'll probably hand off?
Okay.
Mm.
So this was a huge issue that kept coming back over and over again, but it was a deliberate, or it's something that within the writing of the protocol that we had really discussed, especially when you look at what briefs these people usually handle or usually receive. They usually sign off with recommendations. And so this is part of their expectation. So one of the big issues that we had in this was that what rapid response briefs do, they summarize evidence alone. They might attempt to put it in context, but there are many things that go into a decision that rapid response briefs might not be able to incorporate. So for instance, budgets, politics, what is in the manifesto, things like that. And so we felt that giving recommendations goes beyond what it is that we're trying to do. So we're trying to summarize evidence, but the recommendations do not flow only from evidence, but also other things, including also judgments, views, and values that the researcher feels. And we wanted to almost keep it at an evidence summary. And so we did understand why it would be a frustration for them, because it's an expectation built from their past. And therefore, we either give it, or we explain what exactly we are trying to do. And over again, we said, let's discuss with these people and tell them why is it they're not seeing what they're seeing. What we're offering them are different, options. And, we would get feedback saying, but if you just change the word options to recommendations, it's saying 4 things that I could possibly recommend, and then we'd kind of explain to ourselves. But now coming to, if I was to speak to students about this, I think it is where you have to weigh. You have to weigh the benefits and costs of not responding to, or seemingly not responding to a request from a person you actually claiming to help. How do you actually handle that situation if you believe in what it is you're trying to do? There's a certain conversation and dialogue you would have to have with this person. Otherwise, there's a frustration that you're not handling.
This is not a follow-up question, but just to let Chair, and probably why I'm asking. As you know, my area of work is policy. And one of the traditions of policy work and the policy analysis is you actually have to provide a recommendation, giving your stance and where you're coming from, giving the risks of taking that, so that because if you are doing this as a rapid response,
yes,
I want a question answered, I want to make a decision. This decision is of a policy nature, and I want it in a short time.
Yes.
You are taking me back now, study what I brought you, and figure out what to do. It misses the urgency that you claim to be addressing, but also the industry standards of this work.
Exactly.
I must let you know, requires that is done, although you can put caveats about it.
Okay.
That we are researchers, maybe you can add values we don't have, but you do not necessarily leave it out.
Leave it out.
But that is not a portion of view. Every book of policy analysis you look at, you'll find it as a step. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ssengooba, for bringing those more angles to the work. I think we've also learned a lot. I'm personally going to read more about actional research. And yeah, it's a good way to leave a PhD defense. So thank you, Rhoda, for responding to the questions, but you still have one more examiner. So hang in there. And I would like to welcome Professor Mafigiri to examine the candidate.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chair, and also Rhona for your work. I had the distinct pleasure of reading your dissertation, your thesis, and maybe also to declare a conflict of interest, the spirit of conflicts of interest, but I don't think it's a conflict, but I have previously before read some of your work and interacted with you in, now that I remember, in knowledge translation seminars or workshops. But I don't know. I don't think that's a conflict of interest. Yeah, thank you. So nearly half or 3/4 of the question that I had, or I have, of course, have already been discussed, particularly by the opponent and the examiner, yes. So I probably will just highlight a few, just for you to make sure, or to, as a way of emphasizing that they're important. The first one, for me, is a question of reflexivity. As someone who has been involved a lot in the work that you are studying, that I think lends itself to the question of the conflict of interest that the Professor Ssengooba has discussed about. So, like, what do you, or how do you feel maybe all the work and the history and the experiences you've had might have influenced or biased, if I don't know if that's the right word, the way you approached your research? Yeah.
I think being the mother of this baby, you are overly enthusiastic. You know, you want to ensure things happen. You know, you work hard to make sure that things happen, which might not be the same, you know, in a real life setting where, well, it's maybe hired coordinators, other people who are running this service. And therefore, in terms of reporting and saying this works very well with these qualifications, with these attitudes, might be an overly enthusiastic report. And therefore, it might bring about biases in terms of, I'll call it reporting bias. You know, you see what you want to see, or you see more than you see, or you measure more than you would have measured. I would like to think that having other people as part of the work might have toned it down, but definitely there would be issues with that.
Thank you. You use a lot of metaphors. The baby, the mother of the for a social scientist, very impressive. I don't know why you also, or what you think about the metaphor, the word rapid.
Yes.
You're using a rapid response. Why didn't you call it a fast response or a quick response, even though you come from the health sciences that use a lot of military metaphors?
Military.
So I don't know why you chose a rapid response.
You know, if this is really just a joke, but if you remember at the time, there was a rapid response unit in Chireka. So maybe we wanted to sort of bring the metaphor, but I am not too sure where, you know, our history with the word came from, but it almost felt right that we were talking about response, but they respond in an urgent way, in respond to an urgency. Okay, so the urgency is from the other side. Whether it's actual or perceived, they are feeling the urgency, and you are trying to respond in a manner that they will feel is appropriate or, you know, matches the urgency, hence the rapid word. I wouldn't remember the real history with it.
No, it is possible because knowledge, as we know it, as we learn it, is very much culturally based. It's not outside our culture. So if the policy makers always reacting, always need something, you know, because there's an emergency, and then you need because that's why they tell you you had 4 minutes. The opponent told you if you have 1 minute in the elevator, you know, it is something. So I thought maybe that also influences or plays. You would want to say in your experience that you found that imparting or translating this knowledge requires learning systems that rapidly influence policy. But that was something I found interesting, that the metaphor somehow rhymes with the field that you're studying, which is how do you improve policy makers' use or adaptation of adoption or adaptation of evidence. So the other area that interested me was the methods.
Yes.
Methods, or is it methodology? The methods section. And I honestly felt that coming from the health sciences, anyone, you from health sciences, anyone who is from the humanities or the social sciences would admire the way you used the different suite, S-U-I-T-E, of ethnographic methods. You used a lot of very nice ethnographic methods. You could pass for an anthropologist to study a very difficult, maybe complex, not difficult, but complex system, you know, the participant observation, and then you use them, although I've had it here, I don't think I read it in the book, but I've had it here, you called it concurrent learning.
Think aloud?
Think aloud
Yes.
method, yes. And I thought that was very interesting, that you used a lot of these methods. I would want to know what they think aloud tasks, like what type of, like mention, give me 2 or 3 examples of think aloud tasks that you used.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, maybe I can give it in terms of how it ran. So one of the things would hand a brief over to the policymaker, and we would say, you know, take a look at this. And
do you have like an example of which brief or what area you are dealing, like maybe it was National Immunization Day, and some concrete.
I think I in fact,
no,
let me, yes, in the slide. Yeah.
So that you use that to say, on this day, a typical think aloud task you may have engaged in.
Okay. Oops. It's back to the small one. But basically, so one of those, the very first one that we provided for the task was what you see in version 1. So it was about monitoring policy implementation. So, and what they would do, the task was to actually, their task was to read this brief, or to receive it and kind of walk through the journey of how they would do on an average day if they receive this brief. So when you get it, you know, what is it? So before you even read, what do you feel? What is it that hits you? So one of our tasks was to watch for the unspoken language. Is there a frown? Is there, so watching for the unspoken language. And the second thing was to prompt. So where you see, so you do not assume what the frown meant. So you prompt and say, are you feeling something? So the task for us was to get them to think aloud. So what are you thinking? Speak it out, you know, speak it out. But then this had to happen, you know, along them carrying out the task. So you do not stop them long enough to be distracted from the task. And then the other thing was to, I'm losing my train of thought. But
yeah, is this over a day? 2 days?
No.
It's
like an hour.
An hour?
It's like an hour.
And then you come back another time.
And then they'll come back another time. So within that hour, we are kind of picking up the frustration. So I don't like the color. This thing looks huge. What are these logos doing here? So we pick that up, go and work on it. They will be back to look at, a next version and the next.
And you're with a research assistant or alone?
So there's 2 people in here. So this person who's engaging and keeping, and then there's a note taker who's quiet, not asking any questions but taking notes. Yes.
So I feel like maybe like either a supplement. If it were a paper, you have supplement material,
yes,
summary, a box or a method. The reader is missing, being denied a lot of nice information on the methodology. And it's unfortunate the format of the dissertation maybe doesn't allow expounding a little bit on some typical, we call it lived experience, like how you did some real typical, you have to summarize. That's the unfortunate part. But
I think
there's so much to showcase what the action research, what the participatory methods you are using. And they need a bit of those examples.
I think we can do that. What we have presented in here is really the publications as they came out, and the limitations of publications and what. But I think within the limitations where I'll confirm, I think we can highlight, some of the extra information that needs to be in there. It's definitely something that I will consider.
Yeah, that's very good. My last one, maybe I needed to ask, because the way you've explained, the way you've written, the sophistication with which you've done it, and yet you have spent a long time doing, engaging in this work. I don't know if you have any of your family members around, but
I do have a whole clan here.
A clan. What did you tell them? Like, how do you tell them what you did? What problem you are studying? How do you explain to them what you did without using either the metaphors, military ones to scare me, or any other? What is it you tell them you did?
So I would say I've been looking at certain methods might be a big one, at certain ways that we can support people who make our decisions, your decision, or the country's decision to go a certain way, the country's decision to not provide this or provide the other, or you've heard of mothers going for free services, or even when you go to the hospital, it's free. The way those decisions are made, there are certain people who make those decisions. And what I've been studying is how we can support those people with information that helps them make, good or informed decisions. They do not think out of their gut, but based on certain data and information to be able to make that decision.
So the people who rule you are the ones who it's
that would
wonderful.
Be bad.
I enjoyed reading a dissertation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Request to stop here.
Thank you, Prof.
Good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor Mafigiri. And yeah, looking like the social scientists you are, and I think part of the issue about rapid response, I think it's been a medicalized term now. Because even in the world, we have beyond emergencies rapid response units. Like when you're stuck in the middle of a procedure, you can still call on that team, usually anesthesiologist or what. So it's in a way this can actually is a terminology that is likely to spread everywhere, and I guess in all fields. But thank you. And Rhona, we at this juncture are going to invite the public, which is both online, and I will ask all the online audience to please register your presence in the chat, your name and institution affiliated to. Please, if you have a question, a comment, just raise your hand. We shall be able to spot it. And then Rhona is ready to answer. We just have a few minutes to do this. But if there are some in the house, yeah, we can have them as we wait for the online audience. Oops. Yes, madam. You can introduce yourself. Eh? I don't know.
My name is Rhona Mijumbi, and thank you so much for the presentation and the great work put into the research. I would like to find out what would be your recommendation to absorb and roll out this service. Yes, given your research experience, but to the rest of the policymakers, leaders in low-income countries, not necessarily Uganda, what would be your recommendation on rolling out this service? Would you recommend it by sector and they have a hub in each sector, or would you recommend it centralized and, that central hub then addresses, the different sectors? What would be your recommendation?
Thank you so much. I can take one question, or should I? Yeah? Okay. So thank you so much for that. I think my recommendation would really be a centralized service for one specific reason: capacity. We haven't yet built enough capacity to be able to say, let each sector sort of go out on its own. And yet there is an advantage to the sectoral one as well, that there are sectors that that have an engagement with evidence, that have an engagement with research much more than others. So it would look like an advantage. But if we actually, so for instance, the medical field, the health sector, engages a whole lot more with research evidence than many other sectors. So it would be good to start there, almost the way we started. But I think it continues the gap then with the other sectors that might not be as engaged. And these have to be, if we think there's actually a benefit to it, then there's an urgency to actually pull these sectors in as well. So I would think that a more centralized service that's trying to bring as many sectors as possible, and then learning from some of the sectors that seem to be ahead of the others would be a place to start. But I think the biggest issue is in terms of capacity. I'm not very sure that we have enough capacity to be able to roll out now to different sectors. A centralized service might be where we would start, and then kind of the policymakers would have to decide how they prioritize, to be able to reach the different parts of governance. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rhona. I see a hand up. Moses Mukulu, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Rhona, for such an excellent presentation.
Moses?
Yes, can you hear me? Hello? Chair, can you hear me? Chair, can you hear me?
Sorry, Moses, we hear you. Just a second.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
We shall, Moses, you can hold your question as we get another from here. Yes, sir. You just go ahead. Suspect you may have to.
Thanks very much. My name is Professor Mijumbi Deve. And as to a member of parliament, but I got interested in what's going on here. But I also want to recognize the colleagues who are here, who have taken positive position and the offer of alternative information in this presentation. Mine would be just an observation or some comments. One of them is I sound rather so confident in presenting something from this matter because the assessment that has been undertaken, there was three elements. One of them is what is being done for rapid assessment to enable important decisions to be made immediately in an emergency. That's why it's rapid. But obviously, there is continuous and comprehensive assessments which go into ideologies and manifestos and in this politics, whatever it is. So, obviously, there are differences in confidence limits as to how much you can depend on the rapid assessment compared to comprehensive assessment and so on. And I was glad that, in fact, Rhona was able to bring in the element that there is need for more research to be able for future studies to understand these confidence limits, which may be required much later. Secondly, I want to make an observation which my colleague over here brought forward. The running of a country has got more considerations other than the technical input that goes in. That's why the technical people usually give options, and from these options they give recommendations, because there are many considerations that are taken other than just technical input as such. Now, having had a stint in politics, because at one time I used to be a minister of State for Agriculture and the Minister of State for Fisheries, and I realized the difference between we as the professionals, the area that I spent my life on is that I am now the chairman of the Higher Education Awards for the East African community and countries. So I'm still involved in those. But I got to learn very much by having a seat in politics. Politics is run by ideology. It does not matter whether your technical ideas are correct or not. It is only if your technical ideas of professionalism fit into the ideology, the great ideology of the country. That's where, in fact, your technical issues become relevant and important to the running of a country. So it is very important indeed in our recommendations, or for that matter, in form of options, we should be able to see what really appeals to the ideology of running the country from the politics higher point of view. And therefore, I was very happy my colleague here when he brought forward that issue of engaging that options are always very important in the presentation of our results, and we should be able to present them in such a way that our professionalism and our technical input actually drive forward a direction in terms of decision making on how a country is run. The second element, and I want to start with what Rhona and Prof, and I think it was our colleague from South Africa who wrote this issue. In what capacity, in what category does Rhona look herself as? And I think there were three elements, and I won't put them this way. That Rhona sees herself really. No, I think it was a colleague here who said, in fact, there is more driver than that. Now, I can see Rhona driving herself in three different capacities. Having presented this study under the able leadership of the able supervision of my colleagues, in fact, I would like to recognize Professor Sewankambo for having done that, but I think Rhona has been put in a position of leadership because we normally move the way of research. At one time, I used to be the head of the agricultural research in Uganda, but now I see young people, my mentor, are moving forward, and I'm now in back seat. But there is a way of leadership. I see this study of rapid response assessment having leadership as such, And I want to see that she moves into that direction. But I want to also see Rhona in the second capacity. That is the capacity of a partner. In that particular case, she's a co-driver. As the partner, to be able to work with others and also contribute her ideas that will help other people to get into the then that's the capacity that is the capacity of a navigator to guide the others to be able to move forward. So in those areas, the leader, partner, and navigator. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mijumbi. And well, I guess really it's not questions, it's thoughts about this whole work, but we're happy to have had you in the audience. I think time is not really on our side. If Moses is on now, we could have your question. That may be the last question before we move to the next item on the agenda.
Are you able to
Moses,
hear me?
are you still there?
Yes, I'm there. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please,
just to congratulate
your
Rhona
question.
for the excellent presentation. I just want her to help us give us a clear description of cases. She refers to cases, but I don't quite understand the description of the cases she interrogated. Thank you.
The cases.
She doesn't know the cases interrogated.
Okay. Thank you, Moses. If I do understand, you would like to understand the kinds of cases we interrogated. So I'll say two things to this. One, the case in this particular work refers to the Rapid Response Service itself. But if you are also probably referring to the kinds of people we spoke with within, this case study, so we were really mostly dealing with policymakers, so people who you might say senior or mid-level decision makers within the Ministry of Health, which is the policy-making body in this country. But we were also speaking with other people who are connected with policy making in the country. So for instance, development partners, civil society, and then we also spoke, depending on which study you're referring to or sub-study, we also spoke with health systems researchers and people who do knowledge brokerage work in the country. So I have a feeling you might have been referring to, the second category of people that I've spoken about, but the case in this particular work was defined as a rapid response service. I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, thank you, Rhona. I think we have one last question in the chat. What are the possible pull and push efforts in policy making while using the rapid response method? It's just up there. What are the possible pull and push efforts in policy making while using rapid response methods?
So I'd like to think that when we talk about the push, we're talking about researchers trying to get the evidence onto the other side, and then the pull methods or the pull efforts, the policymakers trying to do that. So the possible pull efforts while using rapid response methods, these are usually, or I could say the triggers, the triggers to the pull efforts. So where anything makes a policymaker feel urgent, feel an urgency in making this decision, and yet they would like to use evidence to do that, would be a trigger. So some of these things happen, say for instance, so around as we approach the budgeting, time, many policymakers actually present themselves to Parliament to defend say their budgets. And within those budgets, they might have, presented an intervention, or a program for the next year. And they are asked to actually prove whether this works, what shows that it works. And that's on a Thursday. They are asked, can you come back on Tuesday morning to tell us, what evidence is there that this actually works? Are we just putting money? Even last year we put money. So they are presented with a situation where they have only 3 or 4 days to put evidence together to prove that whatever they are suggesting is actually helpful for the country, and therefore deserves to be given a certain amount of money. So that might be a trigger for a pull effort. They go out to look for evidence to actually prove that this works. What might be a trigger on the push side? This is where the researchers feel an urgency to take evidence. Is, for instance, if we see a change, say, in an indicator, as a researcher or somebody in surveillance, you see a change in an indicator and you're thinking, we haven't had any Ebola cases in the last year. Why do we suddenly have 6? In this sort of place. So this is evidence that you probably want to take in matters of urgency. You need a policymaker, decision maker to take a look at it. And so that might trigger some push efforts on the researcher's side.
Yes, thank you for that. I can see that our candidate is getting a bit fatigued, but allow me to stop with the questions from the public audience. We are going to go for a 5 to 10 minutes short meeting as panelists, and we shall come back to you with a verdict. Just to request members in the room here to please step out for a few minutes. We shall call you back. Don't go back. You have to hear the outcome of this meeting. Those online, please be patient as we continue. Thank you. You can have a cup, a juice, a glass of juice on the chair.
Thank you. So, Rhona, I just want to start off by saying that your PhD covered a very important and relevant topic, that you have set out and made an original contribution to the existing body of knowledge. I want to congratulate you on a comprehensive thesis and a defense where you've very clearly demonstrated that you both are in tune with your findings and the interpretation thereof, but also very clear consideration of the application of it to new research and to practice. So I'm delighted to inform you that in terms of the final outcome is that you passed your PhD. So big congratulations from me and my team at Stellenbosch, and well done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Young for delivering the good news. And usually after that news, then we can allow the supervisors to have some bragging rights. So Professor Sewankambo, please go ahead and be the first one to congratulate Dr. Rhona.
Well, as she says, our chair says, my task is to congratulate you. So congratulations for getting to this point and getting here successfully. But let me say one or two more things. And that is, it has been a long journey, as she said herself. It's been a long journey, but it has ended successfully as those of us who have listened to the discussion and interaction with the examiner. And actually, I'm glad to let you know, I just checked with the IT here. There were more than 100 people logged in and listening to what was going on. So more than 100 witnesses to what you presented. My next comment is to wish you success in your next life. But of course, getting a PhD is only one milestone, and that it doesn't stop here. And as an examiner commented, learning continues beyond this, and we hope that you continue doing that. And as you move forward, keep in mind what one of the examiners said. And I've had it in different fora, anthropologists, sociologists, social scientists, that medicine people are militaristic. And that medicine seems to be a military field. And in fact, our chair, by the way, I don't think she introduced herself very well. She is our boss. She's the dean of the School of Medicine. And when she, in the discussion, she admitted that, for example, the word response or responsive, that we use it in clinical medicine. And we are military, we are both. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Sewankambo. And Dr. Oxman, are you still on?
I'm here. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Rhona. You did a great job. And thank you to the examiners, Taryn and the others. You did an excellent job as well. You must be exhausted now, Rhona, so I'm not going to go on very long, but I do hope to hear a lot more about some of the exciting things that you summarized very briefly at the end of your presentation, once you've had a chance to rest. I hope you'll follow up on that and follow up on some of the research priorities that you outlined. All the best. Right now, you should celebrate and rest. Well done.
Thank you, Dr. Oxman, and thank you to the supervisors. I think please pass on the gratitude to the others who are not here today. Very important when a PhD student completes. Otherwise, it remains, I think, a burden to the supervisor throughout their entire life. So, Rhona, thank you very much for not shaming our supervisors, but also for persevering and bringing this to the end. And in the end, it's really very nice work. We are very proud of you. So now we have given you the PhD, so please give the acceptance speech. But we shall give you like 3 minutes because we need to conclude.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is like a victory speech, I guess. But mine is really to convey my sincere gratitude, to so many people. First, I would really, really like to thank my supervisors, Professor Sewankambo. Without you, this journey would not have begun or been at all. I hope you remember how it started. But for over a decade, your unwavering support and consistent mentorship has shaped me and resulted in so much, including this piece of work. And your powerful insights will always be invaluable. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to Professor Lavis, who was not able to join us today. But his brilliance and deep understanding conveyed with a lot of patience has greatly shaped my understanding of the field of evidence-informed policymaking over the years. Dr. Oxman, he introduced me to this concept of knowledge translation and rapid response services and was and has been a major figure behind the service on which this work is based. Thank you so much. And his support to the very last day, yesterday, he was still sending that support, has been incredible. One other thing, he also taught me how to say no. I would like to thank the examiners, Professor Young, Professor Ssengooba, Professor Mafigiri, who have given of their time today to allow me share my work with all of you, and for the intellectual dialogue we have had. I would also like to thank the chairs, the chair, the dean of the medical school and your team, and the clinic epidemiology unit, plus the IT people without whom today would not have happened. But I'm also grateful to the IDRC's International Research Chairs Initiative Scholarship Program for availing me this opportunity to build my capacity through a fully funded PhD program. The IDRC itself has also been exceptionally supportive of the Rapid Response Service work throughout my study period, offering more opportunities for me to grow in and understand the field beyond their scholarship contribution. I'm immensely grateful. The SURE project, on which we began this Rapid Response Service work, I'm grateful too, because without it, there would be no great case to use to develop, a deeper understanding. I'm grateful to all the colleagues in the different countries with whom we worked. The interviewees that informed the work in these spaces, thank you so much for sharing your insights. We now know more because you gave of yourselves and of your time. My workmates on the Rapid Response Service over the years and my mates on the IRCI program, especially Andre Zida, Pierre Ongolo Zogo Ekwaro, Boniface Mutatina, Allen, and so many others. Thank you so much. I also especially acknowledge my team on the Rapid Response Service in Uganda, Ismail Kawoya, Edward Kayongo Pastan, Luciva, Michael Higenya, and all the others over the years. Your hard work, critique, and encouragement are invaluable. I do have special friends who have cheered me and whipped me into line during this time. Elaine Kalala, Ruth Stewart, I hope she's online, Lorenz, Marie Glorious, you will never know what your support meant, but I'm forever grateful. And then I have a certain group of friends who really don't believe in me. The world could believe in me, but they still think, really? Okay. One of them is present here today, Edna, Jackie, Julie, you're all listening in. Thank you for seeing me through to the end. Then there's a group, the members, they'll recognize themselves. We have completed the journey. The last member has come in. My family, Dad, Mom, Alan, the Mijumbis all over the world, the Epodois, the Emasits, and our children, thank you for your ever-present love, patience, and encouragement. With your unconditional cheers, the world is my oyster. My daughters, Malaika and Tatenda, although you saw this at its tail end, you in fact gave me a renewed purpose and drive to get it completed. Thank you. Thank you for your patience and enduring my long absences. And to the Almighty God, thank you forever. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think we can't really say anything more. That is wonderful.
Yes.
Acceptance. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you once again for your patience and to declare that this difference is yours. You have a new PhD in the market.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye and enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye.
I was not shy. I'm not shy.